Have you ever wondered what really happens to a spirit right after death? I'm not talking about vague stories or generic religious interpretations, but detailed accounts from one of the most studied psychics of the 20th century, Edgar Cayce. What he described about the spirit's journey goes far beyond what we usually hear, and for some it's unsettling. Not because it's something dark, but because it dismantles the comfortable idea many have about resting in peace immediately. According to Cayce, death is not a tranquil end. It's the beginning of an intense process, almost like waking from one dream into another, even more real dream. Cayce, known as the sleeping prophet, stated that as soon as the physical body stops functioning, consciousness undergoes a kind of sudden transition. Imagine being in a dark room, and suddenly a curtain opens, revealing an intense light. It's not heaven yet. It's an intermediate layer, which he described as a place of observation. At this moment, the spirit, still confused, perceives two things simultaneously: that it is outside the body and that it is being observed. He said that this first stage is almost always accompanied by presences, not metaphors, but real beings, who might be deceased family members, spiritual guides, or in some cases unknown figures. The most shocking part: Cayce affirmed that these presences are not always there to welcome. Sometimes they are there to evaluate. This is the point where many would feel relief. So we find those we love. But Cayce warned that the presence of family members does not always mean approval. In this initial moment, the spirit begins to review fragments of its life in a disordered way, like disconnected flashes. He said it's not yet the full life review movie, but a series of quick impressions that serve to stabilize consciousness and confirm that death has occurred. For some, this transition is so quick they barely have time to notice. For others, it can seem like an eternity. What defines this? Cayce stated that it depends on the emotional and spiritual state at the moment of death. But there's something even more intriguing. He described that right after this initial perception, the spirit is drawn by a vibrational point of reference. It's not a physical place, but a state that corresponds to its own inner frequency. People with greater clarity, love, and peace tend to be led to more harmonious environments, almost as if they are pulled by a gentle force. Those trapped by anger, fear, or excessive attachment, however, feel a resistance, as if they are walking through a dense fog. This concept, he said, explains why some souls remain trapped close to the physical plane, what many would call ghosts. And here comes one of the revelations that most bothered scholars of the time. Cayce said that, for these trapped spirits, time does not work as it does for us. 1 minute can seem like days, and years can pass without them realizing it. To them, physical reality still seems accessible, but everything is out of reach. It's like seeing a loved one through glass and being unable to touch them. And this, Cayce affirmed, is not punishment. It's a direct consequence of the state of consciousness in which the person departed. This idea overturns the notion that someone comes to get everyone automatically. For Cayce, the transition depends to a large extent on what each person has built internally. And if you're thinking, but what about the lights, the tunnels, the meeting with a being of light? Cayce also spoke about this, but not as something immediate for everyone. He explained that this tunnel is more like a vibrational passage, a shift in state. Those who are ready enter it almost immediately, feeling a mix of expansion and familiarity. Those who are not ready simply don't see the tunnel. It's as if it's in the same room but with the lights off. This metaphor helped to understand why not all near-death experiences are the same. It's not that the tunnel doesn't exist, it's that consciousness needs to be attuned to perceive it. There is yet another aspect that Cayce revealed, and that few dare to address: the so-called transition zone, where the spirit can, for a short period, observe the physical world. It is at this moment that many accounts of recently deceased people include attempts to speak with family members or remain close to important places. Cayce said that this phase is natural but dangerous, as it can create attachment. Spirits who spend too much time observing the physical plane end up drifting away from the flow that would carry them forward. This is one of the reasons why some cultures perform rituals shortly after death, to help the spirit detach and move on. And here, an inevitable question arises. Who decides what comes next? Cayce affirmed that there is no external judge with a gavel in hand. The evaluation comes from within. In what he called the first complete life review, the spirit relives every moment, but in a much more intense way, not just as it lived it, but feeling exactly how each action affected others. There are no excuses, no hiding places. According to him, it is a process of brutal honesty, but not to condemn, to teach. And it is here that many experience what he called the impact of truth, a profound shock of self-understanding. This understanding is not merely intellectual. Cayce said it's almost physical, even without a body. One feels the weight of every selfish gesture, but also the warmth of every act of love. It's as if the spirit is immersed in an ocean where all waves are echoes of its own actions. And from there comes the choice, to advance to higher planes, where one learns and prepares for new experiences, or to remain closer to the earthly plane to resolve unfinished matters. This choice, however, is not made with words, but with the very state of being. And if you think this is just theory, Cayce made it clear that his descriptions came from readings done for specific individuals, often answering questions about departed loved ones. He did not romanticize the process or paint comfortable images just to console. On the contrary, his answers frequently surprised or even disturbed, because they showed that death is not a straight line to eternal rest, but a path of continuity and personal responsibility. This changes everything, because if he is right, what we do now, every thought and every choice, directly shapes the scenario we will encounter after our last breath. And here is the detail that kept his listeners in profound silence. Cayce did not view death as something distant, but as an event for which we are all already preparing, even without knowing it. Every act of compassion, every moment of learning, every forgiveness offered, it is as if they are steps built for the crossing. And the question that remains is, if the moment arrived today, where would your frequency lead you? When Cayce described what happened after this first life review, he used a word that intrigued his listeners: adjustment. According to him, no matter where consciousness is led, a higher plane, an intermediate zone, or a proximity to the physical plane, there is always a period of adaptation. It's like waking up in a new house. Even if it's beautiful and comfortable, you need to understand where the doors are, how the light works, what the routine of the place is. This adjustment is not done alone. More experienced spirits, whom he called instructors, accompany this process, helping the soul to understand its new condition and, especially, what it must learn from then on. Here Cayce introduced a controversial point. He said that often, these instructors are not people we knew or loved in physical life. They may seem strange, but there is an immediate sense of trust. Some of them have never incarnated on Earth, others have lived many lives here and in other worlds. This to the public of the time sounded almost heretical, but for Cayce it was natural. He said that the universe is inhabited by countless levels of existence, and that death is just a passage between dimensions, not the end of a line. One of the most surprising revelations came when he spoke about layers of learning in the spiritual world. He described that after adaptation, the spirit enters a kind of school but without walls or desks. Learning is done through direct experiences, reliving situations, simulating choices, exploring possibilities that were not lived in physical life. It's as if the soul is trained to understand more deeply the laws that govern existence. And yes, he affirmed that this can include revisiting moments of earthly life in a more detailed way, feeling not only the consequences, but the hidden causes behind them. This idea breaks a very common view of eternal rest as a state of inactivity. For Cayce, rest does not mean stopping, but rebalancing oneself. He said that the spirit, even in the spiritual world, remains active, moving towards growth. And, surprisingly, this growth is not just individual. According to him, there is a level of interconnection so profound that in evolving, the soul positively influences others, just as a musician who improves their technique elevates the sound of the entire orchestra. But not everyone accepts this learning immediately. Cayce spoke of spirits who resist, who try to maintain the same ideas, beliefs, and even addictions from physical life. These, according to him, end up staying on planes closer to Earth, where they can still feel echoes of the material world. This zone, which some would call the lower astral plane, is not necessarily hell, but it can be uncomfortable. It is a place where illusions still seem real, but where there is no true progress. He warned, the longer the soul remains there, the harder it is to break the connection and move forward. For those hearing this now, it might seem harsh, but Cayce insisted that none of this is punishment. It's like a student who refuses to move out of the same school level. No one forces them to stay, but they also don't advance until they are ready. And here he left a practical message. The state in which you live today is what will shape the ease or difficulty of this transition. It's not about having a perfect life, because that doesn't exist, but about being in motion, open to learning and willing to change. A point that always made an impact was when Cayce spoke about reunions. Yes, they happen. Yes, you can see and be with those you love, but not always immediately. This is because, according to him, each spirit arrives in its own time and at its own level. Two closely connected souls may meet quickly, but if they are at different stages of learning, there may be an interval before this is possible. And when it finally happens, it's not like a physical embrace. It's a meeting of consciousness, a fusion of memories and feelings so intense that, according to Cayce, it often dispenses with words. And of course, there was the matter of missions. He said that, after stabilizing on the spiritual plane, many souls receive tasks. Some choose to help on that plane itself, acting as guides for newcomers. Others, more advanced, can assist the living, inspiring ideas, protecting in moments of danger, or even appearing in dreams. This is one of the points that directly connects what Cayce said with common experiences many people report, that feeling of being cared for by someone invisible or receiving an intuition so strong it changes one's course. The most intriguing thing is that Cayce affirmed this participation in the physical world is not random. The soul only intervenes when there is a greater permission, something he called the law of purpose. In other words, you cannot simply go back to resolve any detail or change any destiny. There is a balance between free will and a greater plan. This balance is what maintains order between the planes. And yes, according to him, some spirits even try to interfere without permission, but are gently or firmly redirected by the spiritual instructors. Another aspect he explored was the concept of return. For Cayce, reincarnation is not an imposed obligation, but a natural part of the learning cycle. Many souls, after a period on the spiritual plane, realize that there are lessons that can only be learned through physical experience. And it is at this moment that the planning of the next life begins. He described this planning as much more detailed than we imagine. Choice of birthplace, family, main opportunities, and even the challenges that will aid growth. Nothing is completely fixed, but there is a basic roadmap that guides the journey. And if you're thinking this sounds like predetermined destiny, Cayce explained it differently. It's like receiving a map with several possible paths. You can follow the suggested route, take detours, or even get lost for a while, but each choice leads to new experiences, and in the end, all contribute to learning. This removes the idea that life is a test with a final grade and replaces it with the view that it is constant training with multiple attempts. Perhaps the most comforting part of Cayce's descriptions is that even in the most difficult moments of transition, the soul is never completely alone. There are always presences, even if invisible, that accompany and sustain. For him, this support network is proof that the universe is fundamentally cooperative. And if this is true, it means that the fear of death can be replaced by something much more constructive, conscious preparation for the next phase. Now, if all of this is so well structured, an inevitable question arises. Why don't we remember these processes when we are alive? Cayce answered that it is so we can fully live the present without the constant distraction of waiting for what comes next. But according to him, some memories leak, in dreams, in intuitions, in moments of déjà vu. It's as if the spirit leaves small clues for itself, reminding itself that this life is just one chapter. And here is the provocation he left for those who listen to him. If death is just a change of state, and if what we do now defines how that passage will be, what exactly are you building for your first day on the other side? Cayce said that the moment the spirit fully accepts its new condition is when it begins to explore more subtle planes, and that's where some of the most impressive descriptions from his readings emerge. He spoke of environments not made of matter, but of vibration and intention. There are no streets, buildings, or fixed landscapes like on Earth. Everything seems shaped by the collective thought of the souls inhabiting that level. This means that on higher planes where harmony is the norm, the scenery is incredibly beautiful and welcoming, not because someone built it with their hands, but because the vibration of those living there creates that reality. Similarly, planes of lesser harmony are not punishments. They simply reflect the predominant consciousness of their inhabitants. This idea completely changes the view of heaven and hell. For Cayce, there are no golden gates guarded by angels or fiery abysses where souls are punished. There are states of consciousness, and the environment is a direct extension of what the soul carries within itself. Thus, a spirit that lived cultivating peace, gratitude, and love upon passing will naturally find a plane in tune with these qualities. On the other hand, a spirit that nurtured anger, excessive pride, or material attachment will find a plane that reflects those same energies, and consequently will feel limited and uncomfortable until it decides to change internally. Cayce also detailed that, on these more subtle planes, communication is instantaneous. One doesn't speak with words but with thought. There are no misunderstandings, because what is transmitted is not just the idea, but the emotion and intention behind it. This makes interactions much clearer, and for some newcomers, even disconcerting, as it's not possible to fake feelings or hide intentions. This transparency, he said, is liberating, but it requires the soul to be ready to live with total authenticity. Another curious point he brought up was about learning on higher planes. It's not about memorizing information, but about expanding one's own consciousness. Souls can travel through different levels to learn, observe, or even assist others. This mobility, however, depends on the degree of evolution and the clarity the soul has achieved. The higher the frequency, the greater the freedom of movement. In some cases, Cayce reported that very advanced spirits could move between distant planes, acting as messengers or instructors. And there was something that always caught attention. Cayce said that even in the spiritual world, growth is not solitary. Kindred souls group together to evolve. He called this soul circles, groups that meet life after life on the physical and spiritual planes, helping each other advance. These connections explain why certain people seem to have an instant connection, as if they already know each other deeply, because in fact, they have lived and learned together before. But not everything is permanence. He explained that at certain times, a soul might temporarily move away from its circle to have specific experiences or support other groups. And here was a fascinating detail. According to him, many of the people who briefly cross our path in life, a brief encounter, unexpected help, a word at the right time, might be members of our soul circle on a quick mission. As for preparation for a new incarnation, Cayce said it is done with much more awareness than we imagine. The soul actively participates in choosing circumstances, analyzing which experiences will be most useful for its progress. This includes not only challenges but also talents, opportunities, and relationships that will shape future life. He affirmed that, before reincarnating, the soul meets with spiritual counselors who present possible paths, each with its specific learnings. The final decision, however, always rests with the soul itself. This planning does not guarantee that life will unfold exactly as predicted, because free will continues to exist. We can make decisions that bring us closer to or further away from the initial script. And it is precisely this freedom that makes learning so valuable. We are not just following a script, we are creating with every choice. For Cayce, understanding this process radically changes how we live. If we know that everything we do, think, and feel will be directly linked to what we encounter after death, we become more careful about what we cultivate now. He said that death does not automatically clear the slate. It merely reveals who we truly are without the disguises that physical life allows. One of the most delicate aspects of Cayce's revelations concerned spirits who choose not to reincarnate for long periods. This can happen for two reasons: either because they have already reached a level where physical experience is no longer necessary for a time, or because they are afraid to return. In the second case, he said that these souls often remain on intermediate planes, avoiding commitments that could accelerate their growth. The problem is that the longer they stay there, the harder it becomes to break the inertia. He also mentioned that some souls, before reincarnating, undergo specific training for the mission they have chosen. For example, a soul intending to be a doctor or healer might study healing deeply on the spiritual plane, not just in technical terms, but in energetic and emotional aspects. Thus, upon birth, they will bring natural inclinations and abilities in that area. This is why some children demonstrate extraordinary talents from a very young age. It's not a miracle, it's continuity. Another important detail Cayce shared was that the spiritual journey is not isolated from life on Earth. Spirits and incarnated beings are constantly interacting, even without realizing it. He said that intuition, dreams, and sudden inspirations are channels through which this communication happens. In many cases, the most transformative decisions we make are the result of a subtle impulse coming from spiritual friends who accompany us. But there was also a warning. Just as we can receive support, we can be influenced by spirits who are still trapped in dense energies. These, being close to the physical plane, may try to perpetuate harmful patterns, encouraging destructive behaviors. This is why Cayce emphasized the importance of maintaining balanced thoughts and feelings as they act as a filter, determining the type of influence we attract. And when asked about the end of the road, if there's a point where the soul stops evolving, Cayce replied that evolution is infinite. There are always new levels of learning, new ways of serving, new dimensions to explore. Physical death is only the first of many portals, and life on the spiritual plane is as rich and complex as, or even more so than, life on Earth. For him, understanding this was not a reason to live in anxiety about death, but to live life more consciously. Because deep down, everything is one continuous journey. With every action, every thought, we are not only building our present, but also shaping the scenario of the next stage. And Cayce always left the same question echoing: if what you will find on the other side is a reflection of who you are now, what scenario are you creating today? In Cayce's final accounts of what happens after death, there is one point that almost always left his listeners in profound silence: the notion that every encounter, every experience, and every choice we live now is direct preparation for the next stage. He said that the spirit wastes nothing. Even errors and pains have a role, provided they are recognized and transformed into learning. This means that the judgment so many traditions speak of is not an external tribunal, but an internal awakening. The soul sees itself unveiled and decides what it wishes to become. And this decision is not just mental. According to Cayce, it is as if consciousness shapes its own form and destiny. A soul that realizes, for example, that it left emotional loose ends, might decide to quickly return to try and resolve them. Another, feeling it has completed a mission well, might choose a longer period on the spiritual plane to act as a guide. It's as if each soul is the author and protagonist of its own script, but always in tune with a greater intelligence that permeates everything. A striking point in Cayce's readings was when he described the higher planes, not as distant places, but as states where love and wisdom become practically inseparable. There, he said, understanding is so profound that the concept of separation disappears. There is no I and the other as on Earth. There is a collective consciousness, but without loss of individuality. It's as if each soul is a unique note in an immense song, and at the same time can hear and feel the entire melody. He also spoke about what he called soul memory. Unlike physical memory, which can fail, spiritual memory is perfect. Everything the soul has ever experienced in all lives is there, accessible. On the higher planes, this memory opens up more, allowing the soul to understand the guiding thread of its own journey. This is one of the most liberating moments because the spirit realizes it was never lost. that every stage, however difficult, played a role in building what it is now. But this revelation comes with responsibility. By seeing the whole picture, the soul understands that it cannot hide behind excuses or blame circumstances. It sees with clarity where it could have chosen differently. For many, this is a powerful impulse to return and try again. And here Cayce was direct. Free will is sacred, but it comes with the responsibility to use it wisely. Perhaps the most inspiring aspect is the description of how more advanced spirits interact with those still on Earth. They do not passively observe, they actively participate, influencing paths, inspiring decisions, protecting from dangers. Often, Cayce said, it is these presences that place coincidences in our path. A person who appears at the right time, a word that changes our day, an event that forces us to take a different direction. It is the universe conspiring, but not in a magical or random way. It is conscious cooperation between planes. Cayce also dismantled the idea that death leads us to a permanent state. For him, nothing is definitive, not even heaven. A soul can spend millennia on higher planes and still decide to return to Earth for a specific mission. Others may migrate to experiences in different worlds where the rules of existence are not the same as on Earth. This perspective expands the view that life, and life after life, is an infinite field of possibilities. But there was also the more difficult side of his revelations, the reality of spirits who remain trapped in harmful patterns. He said that, even after death, attachment to vices, resentments, or limiting beliefs can keep the soul stagnant for a long time. In these situations, instructors and spiritual friends work patiently to offer new perspectives, but the decision to change must come from within. This is why, for Cayce, the best preparation for death is to learn to detach while alive, not just from material possessions, but also from grievances, fears, and illusions. Another point he emphasized was the importance of reconciliation. He said that many souls go through long periods of settling accounts on the spiritual plane, not as punishment, but as a way to restore harmony with other consciousnesses. This can involve intense encounters with those we have hurt or who have hurt us, but always with the goal of understanding and, if possible, healing. This healing, he said, is not just between two souls, it reverberates throughout the soul circle, positively affecting several other connections. And when asked if this whole process ever ends, Cayce was categorical. There is no end, only expansion. Life is a continuous cycle of learning and creation, and death is a portal crossed countless times, each time with more awareness. He saw the spiritual journey as an ascending spiral, where with each turn we get closer to understanding our true nature, which, deep down, is inseparable from the very source of everything. This vision completely transformed people's relationship with death. Instead of seeing it as an enemy or a frightening mystery, Cayce presented it as a stage as natural as being born. And just as we prepare for the arrival of a baby, we should also prepare for this great transition. For him, preparing meant living in a way consistent with what we wish to encounter afterward. In the end, Cayce's message was not one of fear, but of responsibility and hope. He said that if life after death is a direct reflection of who we are now, then it is never too late to change. We can start today with small choices, an act of kindness, a forgiveness granted, a more constructive thought. These gestures are seeds that will germinate on the other side, transforming the scenario we will find. And perhaps that is why his last words on the subject are so remembered. What you build within yourself is what you will find after death. There will be no surprise, only recognition. This phrase, simple and direct, summarizes the full impact of his revelations. Death, according to Cayce, is not a mystery to be feared, but a mirror to be faced. So upon hearing all this, the question is no longer what happens after death. The real question is, what am I doing with the life I have now to prepare for what comes next? Because, as Cayce said, the journey does not begin the moment the heart stops beating. It began much earlier and continues without interruption on the other side.